I believe with all of my heart that God is doing something new that will bring you and I the greatest of joys. But if we're not careful, we will miss it just because it's unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Quick story before we dive into our anchor text for today. About 6 or 7 years ago, I was speaking at an event in Dallas, Texas, and instead of the event coordinator sending a volunteer to pick me up at the airport like they normally do, the event coordinator sent me a text that said, "Hey, Sammy, I want you to just take an Uber to the venue and we'll reimburse you." Right? I mean, I promise I'm not making this up. When I got the text from this guy saying, "Take an Uber and we'll reimburse you," I texted him back and I said, "You want me to take a what?" And he says, "I want you to take an Uber." For those of you who don't know what Uber is a ride-sharing app on your phone that functions the same way as a taxi service, but instead of a taxi service sending you a professional driver with a professional ID in a professional taxi cab that smells like apples or, lemons, depending on the air freshener of choice, Uber sends you a random stranger to pick you up in their personal car that may or may not smell like BO. And I'm telling you, it's a true story. When I got this text, man, when I saw it, I broke out in a cold sweat. When I saw the text saying, "I want you to take an Uber," I started acting like a cat on hot bricks, okay? Which is another way of saying I panicked. I did, and the reason I panicked is because the story I'm telling you happened way back in the day before anybody knew what Uber was. Okay, this happened way back in the day before anybody in this room could spell Uber. This was back in the day where only certain cities like San Francisco and New York and Chicago and Dallas had Uber. Nobody was taking Uber in Toledo, I promise you that. This happened way back in the day when people heard about Uber. The first thought that came to their mind was, "That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life." Anybody remember having that thought? Okay, and maybe it's just me, but I've watched enough Law and Order to know you don't get into a car with a stranger that you don't know. Right? I mean, so many things could go wrong. And so I'm sitting at the airport in Dallas, Texas, and I'm looking at my phone, and this person's saying take an Uber, and I'm just going through the worst case scenario. Like, what if I get in the car and he pulls out a weapon and tells me to take off my J's or something? What if he robs me? What if he starts driving in the opposite direction and I don't know where he's going because I've never really been in this part of the city before? What if he kidnaps me because he thinks I'm an African prince who just inherited $60 million, whatever it is, right? What if he does that thing in the movies, when you get in the car and the window goes up and they lock the doors and you can't get out and your phone doesn't work? What if that happens? Right? I'm standing there going through the worst case scenarios in my mind. I'll tell you in a minute why I told you that story, but before I do, I have one quick question. How many of you guys in the room are old enough to remember the days before we had Netflix and all the other 9,000 streaming services? Anybody remember before we had streaming services? That's a lot of people. How many of you guys are old enough to have experienced the national and global phenomenon known as Blockbuster? Anybody remember Blockbuster? Oh, man. Woo! How many of you remember the days where you not only had to drive to a physical store to get a movie, but you had to be kind and rewind or you would get fined? Anybody remember this? You remember when you had the moral obligation to rewind that VHS tape? Because if you didn't, society would cancel you. And the clerk would shame you. Anybody know what I'm talking about? You take Die Hard 1 back and the clerk's like, "Who do you think you are? How dare you not rewind the movie?" Anybody remember those days? I do. I remember driving to a Blockbuster, I think it was on Reynolds and Dorr. Right? You remember 20 minutes going wall to wall looking for your movies, And then you get to the movie you're looking for and you say a little prayer like, "God, please let it be behind the case." You know what I'm talking about? And you turn the case and it's not there and you're like, "Oh." And you just slump your head as a walk of shame, And every once in a while the clerk would call you and be like, "Someone just returned the movie that you wanted." And you're like, "What?" And you walk over, you give them a hug, and you're so emotional. Anybody know what I'm talking about? You're like, I've been driving around town trying to find Die Hard 1. This is the best day of my life. Anybody remember that? I do. Remember the days of Blockbuster and Family Video. But you know what else I remember? I'll never forget the first time my roommate told me that there was a company doing something new that no one else was doing. Right? He's like, this company has a weird name or whatever, but this company is called Netflix, and they mail you movies and you mail it back, and you don't have to go to the store. Anybody remember this? I mean, I don't know how you first responded when you heard of Netflix, but I'll tell you how I responded. I responded to the idea of Netflix the same way I responded to Uber and DoorDash and Airbnb. I responded the same way Thomas Edison and the U.S. government responded to the Wright brothers when they were talking about flying airplanes in the air. I responded the way most human beings respond to new things that are not familiar and new things that make us a little bit uncomfortable. I was like, yeah, I don't know. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I like that. I don't know if I'm comfortable with the kind of change that this new thing is demanding and requiring of me. And yes, I know that there are some of you unicorn people out here who just love new things and you love change and it doesn't bother you. And if that's you, will you please pray for the rest of us? Okay, please say a prayer for us. Aaron, can't you and your unicorn friends, can you please pray that some of your adaptability will rub off on the rest of us? Because the truth is, if we're honest, most of us don't respond out of curiosity to new things. We respond with cynicism. Right? I think if most of us are honest, when we experience new things, we're like, yeah, I don't know if I like that. I love the way Andy Stanley, he's a pastor in Atlanta, Georgia, put it. He says, when presented with new ideas, there are two kinds of responses. There are people who hear a new idea of something that's not familiar and comfortable, and they respond with, wow. And then there are people who respond with, how? Right? When presented with something new, some people go, whoa, wow. I can do a thing on my phone and someone's going to come and pick me up at my house. Right? I can rent my house to random strangers. I don't have to stay at a hotel. And then there are people who hear a new idea and they go, how in the world is that going to work? Wow. Or how? I think if most of us are honest, and I promise we'll get to our anchor text in a second, we respond with how before wow. I think if most of us are honest, when we're presented with new ideas, our instinct, our default is to ask how, quickly followed by why. Right? Like, how's that going to work? Like, is that an app and a random person is going to pick me up and I'm going to ride in his Honda Accord and he's going to drop me? How's that? And why would I want to do that? Why would I want to stay at a random strange person's house that they're renting to me instead of going to a hotel? Why would I do that? Here's where I'm going with this conversation. If you didn't already pick it up, I'm sure you guys are smart and you've picked it up. I wonder how many of us walked in here today asking some of the same questions. Right? Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you for show of hands, but I wonder how many people came in here today going, well, like, how's this going to work? Church in a movie theater is so weird, man. I don't know. How's that going to work? How is it going to work? And why are we doing this? I'm not going to say this out loud because I'm trying to be a team player, and I'm here, and I'm glad that you're here. But you're going, why are we got a paid-off building in Glendale. It's amazing, and the kids don't have to do things in the sticky floors with, popcorn and, God knows whatever they spill on the floor. And this is just so, why are we doing that? Right? If that's you, I just want you to know that there are people sitting next to you who are on the other side of your why. There are people in the room going, why are we leaving the theater? Trust me, I know, because I got the emails. There are people in this room who are going, how is that going to work, Sammy? How are we going to go from being a church that meets at such a public place and now we're going to go to a church building on Glendale and I don't even know where that is for a reason. I don't go that far. How is that going to happen? I like being here. I can invite my friends. It's a neutral setting. It's a movie theater. We get to worship Jesus at such a public place. Why and how are we doing this? Why are we doing something new? Why are we merging? Where is this whole thing going? Why? Why are we here today? Why are things changing? I don't want to oversimplify the question, but in case you missed anything else I say today, here's your simple why. Because it's better. We are here today. Make no mistake about it. Even though it's uncomfortable for some of us, even though it's not very familiar, we're here today because saying yes to the new thing that Jesus is doing is better, not just for us, but it is better for the future generation. Check it out. Listen, I haven't even got to the text yet, and you're all clapping. This is awesome. My people. I love this side of the room, by the way. Thank you. You guys got to pick it up a little bit, but I believe in you guys. I see a couple of promising people over there. Okay, Matthew chapter 9. Give you a little context before we dive in. Jesus is recruiting a team of people to change the world. It's like, I'm going to build a team. We're going to change the world in 3 years. And rather than go to the synagogue or a temple, which is where any respected rabbi would have gone to pick the most elite student, Jesus goes to a tax collector's booth. Amen. I'm telling y'all right now, fam, if this was in 2022, man, the paparazzi would have a ball. This would be on TMZ.com, headline, Rabbi goes to tax collector's booth to recruit followers. And we're all clicking going, there's no way that's happening. But that's what Jesus did. But not only did Jesus go to like the last person on earth that anybody thought he would recruit to his team, but he takes it a step further. He decides to be associated in friendship with them. Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. If you have a Bible, turn there. If not, the words on the screen, listen to what it says. It says, as Jesus went on, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. Right? Matthew is the guy that we all walk by and we're like, oh, don't look at him, traitor. Matthew's the guy whose Twitter bio is like, rip my people off, don't care. Right? People that are like, I know that you hate me and I don't care because I'm rich. Deal with it. That's Matthew. He didn't care. Jesus walked up to him and he's like, hey, I want you to follow me. And the writer says, this is crazy that Matthew got up and followed him. And then it says in verse 10, this is awesome. He says, while Jesus apparently invited himself over to Matthew's house, like, follow me, but I'm going to follow you first to your house because I'm hungry. And it says, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, this is amazing. It says, many of Matthew's tax collector friends and sinners, all those people that you look at and you're like, man, that guy's a bad person. Just so you know, they have a lot of friends of other bad people, and they all get together and they have a party, and they don't care about the rest of us, right? You always think they're just sitting by themselves. No. Matthew's like, I got bros, man. I got a crew. So the whole crew rolled in, and they came and they ate pizza, wings, Chinese. They just were eating, having a great time with Jesus and his disciples. I want you to just picture this moment for a second. Jesus, the respected rabbi, the Son of God, the Messiah that they've been waiting hundreds of years for, he is sitting at one of the most notorious sinners' house, and all of his friends are there, and they're just having normal conversations, and they're just having a meal. I read this in my office, true story, 2 weeks ago, and I just bust out laughing. Like, I started laughing, picturing the scene, and I couldn't help but wonder how many of us, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but if you can't say amen, say ouch. I couldn't help but wonder how many of us church people in the room would be comfortable at this party. Right? I couldn't help but wonder how many of us would be comfortable sitting down with notorious sinners, having normal conversation, eating Jets pizza. I couldn't help but wonder how many of us would be comfortable sitting at a table with people who would know, don't talk like us, don't live like us, don't vote like us, don't believe like us. I wonder how many of us would have sat at the table and go, oh man, I don't think you're allowed to say that word. Do we have a swear jar anywhere here? Because Matthew, your bros are, woo! I wonder how many of us would have done that thing you do. Anybody here ever, if you grew up in, just how you grew up in church, right? You ever go to dinner with people and they're not like church people and they bring the food out and they just start eating? And you're like, whoa, nobody's going to pray? Anybody ever been in a situation like that? And you feel this moral thing, like you got to pray because that's how you were raised and they're just eating. And so you pretend to drink water and you're just praying under your breath. Anybody ever done that? You're like, oh, Jesus, thank you for this meal. Oh, And please forgive all these pagans, obviously. They don't know we're supposed to thank you for this meal. Bless the hands that made the mozzarella sticks. May it be nourishing to my body. I love how we pray those prayers. Like, let it nourish my body. And God's like, I can't help you with that one, right? My mic's breaking out. Here we go. I wonder how many of us would have gone to a party like this and responded the way the religious leaders responded. Listen to what they said in verse 11. Jesus is hanging out with the tax collectors. And it says, when the Pharisees, this is the religious leaders, when they saw this, listen to what they said. They said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Not wow! We've never seen anything like this before. Jesus is hanging out. Nobody could reach Matthew. Nobody could reach his friends. But one dinner party, and they all showed up. No, that was not their response. Their response was how and why. They're like, why is Jesus eating with tax collectors? Now, obviously, these guys didn't know that Jesus had that thing that Superman has where you can hear people from long distance. You guys know that? Jesus has super hearing. He can also hear what you're thinking. They didn't know that, but they're about to find out. How awkward is this for them? Verse 12, because they just slid into the disciples' DM, and Jesus is like, I know what you're saying. Listen to what Jesus says in verse 12. It says, on hearing this, Jesus said to them, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. We got a lot of doctors here at Soma City Church. I don't think I need to ask this question, but is there any doctor or nurse in the house? You ever gone home one day and you're like, I just told your spouse or your roommate, like, man, I just had the best day ever today. I just feel so amazing in my career. As Dan ever said this to you, Bethany, like, I just treated every healthy person in Toledo. It was amazing. Nobody was sick. It was all healthy people, and I just felt great about it. This is why I went into medicine. This is why I went to school for 29 years, so I can treat healthy people. Best day of my life. That's never happened, because that's not the point. And so these guys are going, why is Jesus doing this? And Jesus is going, this is the point. It's not the healthy that need the sick. It's not the healthy that need the doctor, but the sick. And go ahead, he says, and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I have come not to call the righteous, but sinners. Mic drop. Enter scene 2 of the second group of religious leaders who didn't learn from the first guys. Listen to what. Then it says, John's disciples came up to Jesus in verse 14. And then they said this to him, if you could throw that up there. They said to him, how is it? Again, how? No, wow. What's their first response? How? They're like, how? How is this going to work? How is it that we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples, man, obviously they're not fasting. I mean, look at Peter over there, and he's got, sauce all over his mouth. He's never fasted a day in his life. What's going on? How is this working out? Jesus answered them, and he said this. He says, how can the guests, verse 15, of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? The time will come, he says, when the bridegroom will be taken from them, then they will fast. Verse 16, it says, no one, Jesus says, sews a patch of unshrunk cloth or an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making the tear worse. Verse 17, neither, he says, do people pour new wine into an old wineskin. If they do, the skin will burst, the wine will run out, and the wineskin will be ruined. No, they pour new wine, here's our word of the day, into new wineskins, and both are preserved. And everybody said, I have no idea what that means. But I like your energy over here still. Maybe it's just me. But I read that and I was like, no clue what that means. Right, he's like, wine and cloth. And you're like, what in the world is Jesus talking about? This is actually fascinating. What Jesus is doing here is he's using metaphors and language that's easy for first century Jews to understand what he's saying. He's using common metaphors to tell them, to show them that God was doing something new. And if they didn't change the way they thought, they were going to miss it. Even though it feels uncomfortable, even though what God is doing is not very familiar to them, if they didn't change their perspective, they would miss it. Nobody, Jesus says, pours new wine into old wineskin. I'm going to give you a little bit of historical context here so you can understand this passage and try to put it in 2022 clothes, because some of you are still looking at me like, I still have no idea what any of that means. Real quick, before I explain what I think this is saying, I don't know that much about wine, so if you're in the room and you're like, man, I know a whole lot about wine, don't come to me afterwards because I really don't care. I'm just being honest. I don't know a whole lot about wine, and I think wine is gross. I just think it's overrated. I think it's disgusting. But I think it's fancy. It's really cool, which is why I got upgraded to first class a year ago. This has nothing to do with the sermon, but it's like one of my first times. Like, this is amazing. And the lady's like, "Would you like free wine?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I would like free wine. I don't even drink wine. I wasn't gonna drink it. I don't like wine, but I took it anyway because I've always wanted to know what it was like to be the people who sit in first class with a glass of wine while all the peasants walk by." Anybody know what I'm talking about? I'm like, I have always wanted to know what that was like. And so I sat there and I took my little wine, and I pretended like I was on Bluetooth. And I was like, "Yeah, aren't we better than everybody? Yeah, we're so great. This is amazing. Sorry, it's loud. All the peasants are going back to 79 AD. This is great. I'm the greatest man alive, That's a true story. You're laughing. But here's the point. You don't have to be an expert in wine to know that the way we treat wine and preserve wine in 2022 is different than they did in the first century, because we got a bottling process now, right? We put wine in bottles to preserve the wine, but they didn't have that in the first century. And because they didn't have that, what they did was they actually took wine and they put it in wineskin. Can you throw that verse back up again? They would take a wine and they would put it in wineskin. And what Jesus is doing here is he's using a metaphor that's familiar to them. He's saying, how when you get that new wine, you're not going to put the new wine, you're not going to put it in an old wineskin. And the whole crowd's going, "Yeah, no, nobody would do that. Of course we wouldn't do that. Because if you did that, it not only would ruin the wine, but it would ruin the wineskin." Let me put it in 2022 context for you. If Jesus maybe were given this metaphor today, maybe he would say this. He would say, "Hey, you can't plug the AV cables from your old video game system into your HD TV." Okay, this is a true story. 2 months ago, I don't know where Andy is. My kids were like bored, and I was like, "Let's play Nintendo Wii." And I dusted it out, from storage. And I spent 30 minutes trying to shove it in the back of my TV. I'm like, "It's yellow, and it's not going in." And so I FaceTime Andy because he's my tech support. I'm like, "Andy." And Andy's like, "Sammy, you can't put that. You have a new TV." Right? It's not the same input. Right? You got to get an adapter. You got to get a new video game system. And that's in essence what Jesus is saying. Are you guys catching this? Is that helpful? Are you with me? Yeah? Anybody not on this side understand what I'm saying? You guys over here, I'm trying here, right? Jesus is saying you cannot put something new in the context of something old. And I don't want to oversimplify this narrative, but the picture that Jesus is painting here is that God is doing a new thing. That there is a new covenant. That God, don't miss this, is forever changing how man interacts with God. There is a new covenant, and you cannot fit the new covenant in the context of the old covenant. What Jesus is saying here is, this is amazing. He's saying God is trading the tabernacle for tables. If you don't know what I'm talking about, in the Old Testament, in the days long ago, all of the ancients had to travel to the tabernacle to meet with God. And when they got to the tabernacle, they couldn't even go inside. They had to wait outside, and they needed a priest, and the priest would represent them, and the priest would go to God on their behalf, and then the priest would come back to the people on behalf of God. That was the only way man could engage with God. That was the old covenant. But then Jesus showed up, and he's sitting at a table with notorious criminals and sinners, and he's going, God has traded the tabernacle and the temple for tables. God has created a new covenant, and in this new covenant, the Holy One is going to sit at the table with sinners. Come on now. This is the scandal of the gospel. If you're in the room today and you're like, I don't even know why all these guys are excited and they're raising their hands or whatever, this is why we get hype. At the end of the day, the reason we're excited is because Jesus gave us access to God. It's because we went from people who were on the outside, and Jesus is like, hey, I don't care where you've been or what you've done. You're invited to come sit at the table with the Holy One. God was doing something new that was going to change the world. And the religious leaders missed it because it was uncomfortable and because it wasn't very familiar to them. And Jesus is going, no, God is not only here, but God is near. Can I ask you a question? You don't have to answer out loud. How close is God to you right now? Doesn't matter where you are spiritually. If you've been to church your whole life, maybe this is your first time coming to church and someone dragged you here. I don't care if you're in high school, middle school, if you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s. How close is he? See, I think if most of us are honest, a lot of us would say, yeah, God's here, but I'm not sure that he's near. Right? Well, like he's here. I mean, he's in the room, I'm sure. I'm sure he's in Toledo. Obviously, he's in the world somewhere. God's presence, I believe in God, but I'm not sure, I'm not convinced that God is near. Those of us who are not church people or God people, it's easy because we're going, yeah, if he's here, he's not near to me because I don't believe what he believes and I don't live my life the way he wants me to live my life. And so that makes it clear. But I think it's so interesting that those of us who are church people also have the same answer. Because we're going, we know he's here, but I'm not sure that he's near because I haven't really been doing everything I'm supposed to be doing. Can we just say that out loud, church folks? Can we just be honest and just admit that most of the time we believe God is near only when we're doing all the things we're supposed to do? Anybody? Am I the only one? Come on now. I'm killing it this week. Read my Bible. Woo, I even highlighted some verses. And God's never going, that's my boy. Let's go. You know, talk to my neighbor. Help them push the trash can back in their driveway, and nobody saw me doing it. And Jesus like, look, all the angels like, whoa, I'm getting closer to my boy now. He has earned my presence. And then you mess up. And God's like, 2 steps back. All right? How many of you in the room are going, man, I don't remember the last time I cracked my Bible. I don't remember the last time I opened my Bible. I don't know the last time I even prayed, really. And I tell people all the time, I'm praying for you. Doesn't happen. Anybody ever do that? Hey, I'm praying for you, man. And then you see them next time, you're like, oh, shoot. I better say a prayer real quick before they ask me. Dear God, praying for them. Oh, got you, bro. See, I think if a lot of us are honest, it is really hard for us to even embrace this new idea that Jesus is introducing. I wonder how many of us in the room today would be confident to say if Jesus were walking Toledo, Ohio, he would come to your house, sit at your table, and you guys would just laugh and have the best time ever. How many of us are like, I don't know if I want Jesus to come to my house. Can I get 30 days to clean up my act, to pick up, hide some posters, set all the stations to Caleb? Can I get time to prepare, make it all positive and encouraging because Jesus is coming? The scandal of the gospel of what Jesus is doing, Emmanuel, that God is not only here, but he is near and he has nothing to do with you. That's why it's called good news. The reason it's called good news is God saying, I'm going to come close to you, Adam, okay? And it doesn't matter what you've done or where you've been. That sounds like a Backstreet Boys song. I mean, is that Backstreet Boys? That's what I thought earlier. It doesn't matter. Not only am I here, but I'm going to be near you. It's what the gospel and the good news is. That's the main idea, the main course today. If you miss anything else, I hope you walk out of this room today just remembering that, man, not only is there a God in heaven who is here, but there's a God who is near. And his nearness has nothing to do with my behavior or my performance. I promise you, the God of the universe is not taking steps forward and backwards based on how you did this week. He's like, I am here at your table. Jesus was doing something new that nobody had ever seen before. And the religious leaders missed it because it made them uncomfortable. And I don't want us to miss what God is doing, not only in inviting us to sit at the table, but SC fam, I don't want us to miss what God is doing in our church. And I know the main idea from this narrative in Matthew chapter 9 is the Old Testament and New Testament covenant. But having said that, I think this framework can be applied to the season that we're in as a church. I think we can use this framework to remind ourselves that we cannot let discomfort and unfamiliarity rob us of future joy. Amen. Do me a favor. Look at the person next to you. Say, don't let it happen. That was so weak. Say it like you believe it. Don't do it. Come on, tell them. Don't let it happen. Do not let discomfort rob you of future joy. Do not let temporary, I don't know how I feel, rob you of something that's actually better for you. I don't know if you ever thought about it this way before, but so many of the things that you and I think are normal and so many of the things that we enjoy today is only possible because either you had to endure the initial discomfort or somebody else did. Right? So many of the things you're like, I love that. That's normal. Uber Eats, DoorDash, Airbnb, flying on an airplane. I promise you, the only reason that is normal is because somebody was willing to be the lone voice in a sea of hows to go, wow. Can you imagine if we could pull that off? If we're not careful, just like the religious leaders, we let current discomfort and unfamiliar rob us of future joy, not just for us, but for the next generation. And what I'm asking you this morning, I know we got a long journey ahead, is are you willing to make the connection? Are you willing to sacrifice just a little bit of temporary discomfort for the perspective that this may actually be better, not just for us, but be better for the next generation? Are you willing to be the lone voice of wow? We had chapel a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago when we first made this announcement for the merge. And for those of you who don't know what chapel is, and it's this kind of small gathering that we do on Mondays here and there. And it's Mondays at 10 o'clock. Most people can't make it, I understand, but some people can. And so after the day we made the announcement that we're merging together as one church, and we had chapel, there's about 15 or 20 people there. And what I love about the chapel environment is that it's just an opportunity for people to share. I'm not preaching and whatever. We just give the community an opportunity to just say how they're feeling. And I just remember, we're just taking the pulse of the room, and we're like, how's everybody feeling about this big announcement? We're going to do a merge. What does everybody think? And I appreciated just the honesty in the room. And I don't know where Tabby Weems is, but I know she was talking about what this process is like from an introvert. And she's like, man, it's just hard. It's going to be a lot of people, and I'm not sure how it's going to work. And everybody was just sharing honest thoughts. And I told the group, and I don't know if any of you guys know this or not, but just so you know, my initial reaction to this merge idea was not wow. It was not. Ask Lori. She's in the front row. She's like, are you excited about this? We're 2 months into conversation. My initial response, how's that going to work? I'm like, I don't know. Why in the world would we do this right now? And so we're sitting in chapel, and we're having this conversation, and people are just kind of sharing their thoughts and sharing how they feel about it. And there are so many moments that I appreciated because of the honesty and the vulnerability. But there was one moment in particular that I'll never forget, and it was Katie. Where's Katie? There's Katie over there. And I didn't ask you if I should share this, but too late now, so it's in my notes. I'll say sorry later. But there's this moment in chapel where Katie was sharing, and she said something that I'll never forget. She said, man, this thing it's different, and it's a little uncomfortable, and I'm not sure how it's going to go, blah, blah. And then she said this. She said, but I'm so excited for what this means for our kids when they grow up in youth group. And then she said, I'm so excited for what it means for their kids. And I kid you not, when you said that, Katie, I literally wrote down in my notes, I said, who does that? Who thinks like that? Like, seriously, I've been leading this whole process for months. And I'm just being honest with you, that had not occurred to me one time. And I just remember thinking to myself, what kind of person says that? What kind of person sits in the room and goes, oh man, I'm so excited for what this is going to mean when we're not in the room. I'll tell you what kind of person does that. The kind of person that understands that you cannot put new wine in old wineskin. The kind of people that understand that just because something new makes us uncomfortable, just because something new is a little unfamiliar, doesn't mean that it's not better for us and the next generation. The kind of people that understand that this is the long game that we're playing. The kind of people that understand that what God is doing in the room is never just for the people in the room. The kind of people that understand that when God moves in the room, He's always thinking about the people who are not in the room. He's always thinking about the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. The kind of people that understand that when God does something new, we cannot let discomfort and unfamiliarity rob us of the opportunity to play a small part in something that will echo for eternity. The kind of people that understand that what God is doing here, hear me out, make no mistake about it, this is bigger than filling a room with people. This is about reaching people who are far from God. For those of you who don't know, our vision is to be the best friend this city has ever known. And if you were like, well, I don't even know what that means, that's just a fancy way of saying our vision is to do Matthew chapter 9. That's our vision. Our vision is meals and conversations with people who are far from God. And I know there's a lot of questions and a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions. And I promise we're going to walk with you guys step by step. I promise we're going to do due diligence, and we're praying for you, and we're working hard to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks. But for what it's worth, I just want you to know that I am convinced that this merger, this new thing God's doing at Soma City Church will exponentially move us closer to the vision of reaching people who are far from God. Can I put it in perspective for you guys? You're like, I'm excited, but I don't know. Check out this first image. This is an image. It's a Google drop. Thank you, Shannon, for that. This image is a lot of people who attended Soma City Church before this new season. Except for those of you who don't give us your address. If that's you, you're not on there, sorry. But I asked Shannon, I said, can you just drop the pins for me? Can you just take the addresses of the people we know, who would say, I go to Soma City Church and I believe in the vision and I want to be a part of reaching people who are far from God. This is the pin. All of our city. That's it. It's where people live. I want to show you what this looks like because of this decision that we made for this merger. Can you throw the next one up there? Oh, man. Y'all ain't ready for this. Whew. I'm going to just let you just stare at that for just a second. Can I share a dream I have with you guys that I try not to think too much about, because if I do, I can't sleep? Sometimes I dream of a church whose greatest accomplishment is not filling a room full of people on Sunday morning. Sometimes I dream of a church whose greatest accomplishment is filling tables all over the city with people who are far from God. Sometimes I dream of a church whose greatest burden is not how do we get more and more people into the room on Sunday morning to sing songs about God. I love Sundays. I love crowds. I love singing. But I dream sometimes of a church whose greatest burden is how do we send the people in the room out there so they can do what Jesus did, so they can sit at tables with people who are notorious sinners, people who never stepped foot in the church, and they can sit next to them and look him in the eye and have normal conversations and have normal friendship. And when the time comes, they can say, I don't know if you know this or not, but there's a guy named Jesus, and 2,000 years ago, he changed the way God relates to man. And he's not only here, but he is near to you, and he is near to your family, and he cares about you more than you could ever imagine. And he's the best friend I've ever known. And I just want you to know that he has an amazing plan for your life. Can you imagine Can you imagine a church where this happens? A church where we gather and then we scatter. And then we go to church all over the place. In about 4 or 5 hours, I'm going to be meeting out of the Mikeleze in there at their house. My circle is going to get together. 2 weeks ago, we hosted. There's about 20 kids in my basement. 3 families from our neighborhood came. And we sat in my living room and we had pizza and we ate. Aaron was there and we talked about life and God and struggles. And there were people sitting there who will tell you if you ask them, I don't know if I believe in Jesus or the Bible or God or the church, but I'm here in the room. And I dream of the day where that is the reality hundreds of times in hundreds of neighborhoods around the city. I dream of a church who's willing to embrace discomfort for the sake of the next generation. I dream of a church who's willing to walk into an environment like this and go, man, I know it's a little uncomfortable and this may not be my normal vibe and I don't know how it's all going to work and it's bigger now. Will anybody see me and all that stuff? That's all true. But man, I know this is not just about me. I know that there are people out there who need to hear the good news of Jesus Christ, and that's why we did this. I sometimes dream of a church whose initial response is, wow, not how. That we walk into a room like this and go, wow, isn't Jesus amazing? Wow, isn't Jesus great? Wow, can you believe he's at a table with all of these people? Can you believe that he invited me to be at the table? Wow, isn't it amazing that Jesus is not only here, but he is near me, even though I'm a sinner and I have never earned everything I was supposed to do, and I always mess up all the time, and I don't do all the things I'm supposed to do, and I always keep messing up. But he's not only here, but he's near to me. Wow, isn't it amazing that I get to be a part of it? Isn't it amazing that we serve a God who is not only near and here, but wow, we serve a God who the Bible says is chasing after us. Woo, can I just end with that? I promise I'm almost done. The band can come on up. Did you know this? That the Bible says that God is not only here and he's not only near, but he is chasing you. I was at soccer practice with my kids the other day, and the thing was over, and Nora and her friends, and they're like, you guys want to play tag? And they started chasing each other around. And I thought to myself, I'm like, man, I miss playing tag. I'm like, you know, as adults, the only time someone is chasing you, it's always bad, right? Seriously. If you're in a crowd and someone's running and they're chasing them, you're like, oh, I'm out of here, right? We're only ever being chased if something bad's happening. And I saw that image and I thought, man, God, will you open my eyes to see that there are some good chases in the world? And I don't know who this is for, but I just wanted to remind somebody here today that God is not only near or here, but he's like, I've been chasing after you all of your life. Did you know that? You're like, but I don't know if I believe you. He's like, isn't that amazing? But I'm not that great. Is that amazing? I'm chasing after you, Matthew. I'm chasing after you. I'm trying my best to stay on stage because I know the camera people get mad when I leave the stage. But I just got to do it. God's like, I'm coming. Yeah, I'm chasing after you. Let's go. Sorry for those of you who are online. But God's like, I know you thought you snuck in and you're going to sit in the back and no one's going to see you and you're going to sneak out. And God's like, no, I'm not only here, I'm not only near, but I'm going to chase after you. I'm going to find you. I don't care who I got to go through. Sorry. That's a big book bag, by the way. But I'm going to get through you. Here's my boy, Preston. How you doing, brother? It is so good to see you, man. You doing good? It's so good to see you. This guy, how many years? 12 years. How you been, man? Yeah. Good to see you, brother. It's been a long road, but God's saying, I'll come to you. I see you. I chase after you. The songwriter says his goodness is chasing consistently after us. Goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. If you're in the room today and you've never said yes to friendship with Jesus, if you've never sat at a table, if you're like, I don't know if we can have a conversation, I want to invite you this morning to pray a prayer that we ask you to pray every Sunday. It's a simple prayer. It's, Jesus, I believe and I give you my life. You guys mind if we just bow our heads real quick? Everybody in the room, if you could just bow your heads. I'm not going to make it weird and awkward, I promise. But if you don't have that friendship with Jesus, maybe it's been a while. Maybe if you've gone a while and you're like, I don't even know where I'm supposed to be. I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. I want to invite you to pray that prayer. Jesus, I believe and I give you my life. Just say that to him. That maybe today might be the first step in the greatest journey that you've ever been on. Jesus, I believe and I give you my life. Jesus is not only here, but he's near to you, regardless of what you walked in here with today. And to everybody else in the room who are like, man, I know Jesus. I've had plenty of meals with Jesus. The good news is the same. Jesus is not only here, but he is near to you. Will you guys stand?